Hello and welcome to another episode of CYC Youth Chat. I'm Mark, and joining me on the panel today we have David, Gabriella, Michelle and Andrew. Today we'll be discussing one of the most dangerous sins we are faced with today, pride. It says in James chapter 4 verse 6, God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. Before we discuss the harshness of this verse, I'd like to first ask my panel here, of experts of course, what is pride? David, what do you think?
Pride is saying to God, I'm going to do things my way, relying on yourself, on your own knowledge, on your own virtues, just basically not trusting God in every single aspect of your life.
I think in a way it's sort of blaspheming against the Holy Spirit, because you're not really saying that God is number one in your life. You're saying that you are on top of that, or you are not in need of Him, and by doing that you are blaspheming against. I think there's a verse that says, "He who is proud of his knowledge falls in blasphemy." Blasphemy.
So, do you think there is a difference between? Of course, pride is separated with like earthly and spiritual. Like, do you think there is a difference, and can you kind of like clarify it?
Oh, of course. Like there can be sort of social situations where you'll be proud, and worldly situations, but there can also be spiritual situations, like the Pharisees. The way they served and things like that, or the way they prayed, even in the synagogues, is a proud prayer, and that's a form of spiritual pride. But
thinking you're above others.
Yeah, of course, and thinking that exactly. But in the world, it can be in social situations like even
it's
where
amazing. God, like Jesus Christ Himself, was like showing His disciples that like He's not even listening to the prayer of the Pharisee, but rather He's listening to the humble prayer of the tax collector.
Yeah. And I think, but in both situations, God has blessed. Like, so what you are proud of, it's a blessing that God has given you, whether it's worldly or spiritual blessings. So either way, like they are both in a way as bad as each other, I think.
Andrew, Michelle, do you guys have anything to add regarding what is pride?
I think pride starts with the initial thought where you basically say that you have done this by your own hands. Or it's good to be happy with what you've done. It's good to feel proud of your achievements, but you always need to turn back to God and thank God, because He's the one that gave it to you. Whereas pride is beginning, I've done this by myself. I've achieved this by myself. And that's like when you start turning away from God.
Of course.
I think the most important lesson, it says in Isaiah actually, chapter 14, the way the devil fell from heaven. It says, the devil actually said, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. So that's the feeling of pride. And whenever any one of us or anyone on earth has the feeling that they want to be above God, that's what pride is. And that's when you're going to fall. You're
adhering to the devil's wishes.
And that's the first sin. That's the first thing that ever happened. And that's how we took down all the angels, those angels that went down.
And it's not just like the fall of angels. It's also the first reason for the fall of man.
There's actually a verse from Jesus, son of Sarah, and it says the beginning of the pride of man is to fall off from God.
Yeah, because Eve and Adam both had that mindset that we can be like gods, but they're so far from it. And what happened at the end? All of mankind fell because of pride. It was the first sin, by the angel, turned demon Lucifer. And he brought down people with him as well as a result of it.
And what's amazing as well, he was actually a cherubim. He was one of the highest angels.
Really?
It says here, how you have fallen from heaven, O day star and son of dawn. And so he was actually one of the most, they said he had a beautiful...
He had a huge army. It says that when he went down, he took down 1/3 of all the angels in heaven.
In Revelation
it's ridiculous. It's a crazy amount. So what other dangers are there for falling into pride?
I think that God can't, it's very, I don't know the exact verse where it is, but it says that God can't, He can't look at he can't be in the haughty heart. He can't look at the proud. He resists them. And I think that is a big danger in itself. It creates that bit of a barrier.
That was the opening verse as well. It's huge. God resists the proud. Does that mean
such a strong word.
Yeah, God, does that mean, I heard once an analogy, there's an amazing analogy by Father Anthony Messiah from America, where he was saying it's like that verse, that specific verse is like, God, you're playing an NFL game and you're against God, and you're asking, what are you doing there? You're meant to be blocking me, I'm the quarterback. He's like, no, I'm against you, and as soon as the ball is snapped, I'm going to take you down. That's how, much God hates, not hates, but how much He's against the pride, as a sin. So look, how can you what are the dangers in terms of falling?
I think you can say, hey, because there's no reason why God won't hate that, the pride. Yeah, you can say
Yeah.
that.
God
Yeah.
hates sin. It's
Yeah.
disgusting to him.
Yeah.
It's disgusting to him.
But I think pride in, like, do you agree that it may be pride in specific? And what makes it such a, like, hated
Because
sin?
it's, in a way, it's sort of the mother of sin. It gives birth to sin. So when you're proud, you begin to judge.
Yeah.
You begin to gossip. You think you're on top of everyone.
Yeah, you
so
become
it leads,
arrogant.
Yeah, you become very, and then it leads to so many other things. So that's why it's such a terrible thing. Like, so say if I lie, or say if I lie, that necessarily doesn't really lead to, I'm not saying lying isn't bad, but
course.
it doesn't really give birth to many other sins.
Especially because it's very subtle. Like pride can start
Yeah.
with a single thought. You know, you're very proud of your achievement, but then that pride and that achievement slowly grows and grows, and it becomes something big. So first you start off with God in your heart, and then slowly by slowly the image of you gets bigger and bigger, and slowly pushes God out of your heart until eventually there's no room for God.
Of course.
I think this example's been used many times, but like look at, say, King David. I mean, he got to a stage where he was able to sit back and he's like, oh look, I'm going to have a rest now, send my people out to war, and I'm going to chill back at my castle, you know? And that feeling of pride, you know, it's going all right, you know, there's nothing wrong. Look what it led to. It led to him falling into
Exactly.
sin.
That's a really good example.
And, you know, he lied, and the root sin was pride, and it led to everything else. And many times, I think, in your life, you'll see all these sins, right, and you say, oh, I need to get rid of this sin. This is the main one. Once I get rid of it, it'll be fine. But, you know, if you look deep down a lot of the time, and you keep trying to trace it back, go follow the steps, it will lead back to
Yeah,
pride.
of course, and
Of course.
as well, like you were saying, like you say, sometimes you say, oh, if I just get rid of this sin, you know, I'll be, what's it called?
Yeah,
Like a humble heart would be saying, like, I have so many, but like maybe this is the first one I should get rid of, you know what I mean? And then it's like you're building that relationship with God. And I heard once, like, God's like He's shining a spotlight, and like the closer you get to God, the closer you get to that spotlight, and the more kind of like spots and blemishes you can see in yourself. I think that's the humble way to look at it.
That's a good analogy.
What do you
Of
think?
course. Yeah, like, yeah, that was the example of when you used to use. And I think it's so true, because you become further and further away of that light, and you start to not recognize the blemishes on your own like your soul, in a sense. Like,
I don't know about you guys, but sometimes, you know, I enjoy, you know, like, say for
Yeah, of
example,
course.
I've played a soccer game, and I had a mad game. You know, I scored a hat trick. One of them was a bicycle kick, and then everyone's coming up to me after, and they're like, "Mark, you're like the best player. Like forget Ronaldo. You're the next for Ballon d'Or." Like, I get that feeling of, you know, joy. You know, like, is there something wrong with that? Like, is it wrong to feel joy from other people's praise?
I feel like there's a line that you have to draw. The first thing you have to do when you receive that praise is attribute it to God. Otherwise, you will fall into crediting it to yourself.
But,
you can be proud of the achievement itself, but if you attribute it not to yourself, then it's wrong.
Like, there's nothing wrong with being happy, because, like,
Yeah.
you know, God was creating the earth, and then after He did one thing, it is good, you know. And it's all right to see, it's all right to say, like, look, oh, this is good. But as long as that doesn't take over your mind, you need to attribute it back to God. And, like, I know it's a common example, but I love it when soccer players, they're sitting there, they're running obviously on the pitch, they score a goal, and the first thing they do is sign of the cross. Like, that just shows,
nice.
like, it's the first thing that comes to their mind.
Yeah.
I'm not going to take the glory, I'll give it to God first. And when you see that on TV, you understand, like, this guy's giving it to God,
Yeah,
not,
yeah, of
it's
course.
not himself. So.
Yeah.
And I think a part of that is like when we recognize that what we have achieved, although it is amazing to be happy about it, it is because we know that it is a blessing from God.
Of
So
course.
obviously that's when we start giving
And
thanks
you,
to
in
God.
a way, you feel so much more joy when you do attribute it to God. Like,
Yeah.
when you see something that's been done in your life, and you know you've achieved something, or you've achieved a bit of a spiritual victory. That when you attribute it to God and you're grateful to God and you thank God, it's such an amazing feeling, because God gives you that peace and that joy. He's well done, it's such a blessing. That joy that God gives you is greater than the joy that you may receive from praise of others. That's more of an artificial joy,
course,
and
of
it's
course.
very temporary.
Of course.
But when you receive it from God Himself, like, it's a great blessing. Like,
David, you look like you had something to say.
Oh, no, that question was good, because, like, in my mind, you just split it into two categories, like receiving praise from people, and then, like, generating praise for yourself from your own victories. And I think, like, there's that old Desert Father story about the monk who was a bit proud, and then his confession father told him to go to, like, a cemetery, like the graveyard, and to, like, start cursing all the dead people, like, to, like, just give them mad insults, like, talk about their mum, all this stuff, and, like, and then he comes back, and then his confession father's like, how did they react? And, like, they didn't say anything. He's like, okay, all right, I want you to go back and praise them, like, give them all these compliments, these nice things. And he went back and was like, how did they react? They didn't say anything. And he said, be that way. So like when people praise you, like, all right, you know, just don't let it like sink in. Just treat it as if, you know, and the same when people curse you, sort of thing. Like, and I know this one guy from St. Mark's, and like he gives amazing like talks. And whenever he does that, like you look for him after the talk, and he's kind of just disappeared already. Yeah. And it kind of reminds me of like Saint Simon who moved the Mount Makatam, and like he deliberately asked the Pope to be like in the middle of the people so he couldn't be seen. And then it says in the Synaxarium that after he moved the mountain, he was never seen again alive. Like he just wasn't.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to escape the praise of people. Like,
okay, so what are some examples of, you know, proud people that we can find in the Bible?
I was actually listening to a sermon just yesterday, and a story from the Bible, Old Testament, really spoke to me. Was this one about Saul? And so the story goes that, you know, Saul, they had a victory parade, and they're coming back, and you can imagine all the fanfare and all the people celebrating, right?
Of course.
And David's there as well. And the people start saying, Saul has slayed his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. And from this one saying, Saul was completely driven mad. He went angry.
Yeah.
And just hearing that David is better than him in some way made him go nuts, right? Even though David had been his loyal servant, David had helped him, David had loved him and shown him all the care in the world, he ignored all that. And so he ignored blessings in his own life, and instead pride took over. So I think that, you know, that example is just so important, because often we'll just ignore all the blessings we get. Someone will serve us all they want, and we'll forget that just because pride, you know, is more important.
And not attributing our, you know, achievements to God can act like Saul can drive us mad.
And he should have been happy that he lived. He just came home from a war. He should be thinking, oh, you know, I'm back home. You know, all the people are happy.
Yeah.
This is amazing.
Sometimes
you know?
we ignore, you know,
we ignore the blessings,
all the blessings that God bestows upon us. Yeah.
That's like the story in Daniel of King Nebuchadnezzar, and he starts, you know, he's boasting about the mighty kingdom he had built, and you know how great he was, and how it was all his work. And then a voice actually came from heaven and said, King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you, and they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. And he talks about how, you know, he will eat grass like oxen and live like the animals. He said, until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. And Nebuchadnezzar was very humbled from that experience, because like he hadn't attributed anything to God, and he had completely and he felt, and it says he was growing fingernails like eagles, and his hair was growing messy, and
eating the grass.
Yeah, he was eating the grass like oxen.
Yeah. And sometimes it feels like maybe like even the prodigal son to a certain extent, you know, even he was like a little bit proud. You know, he felt, okay, I don't have to serve I don't have to serve in my father's home anymore. You know, just give me my money and I'll be out of here. Like sometimes that's what we do with God. You know, we say, okay, you know, you've done your part. Give me what I need, and I'll do everything on my own. You know, when we're given a service in church, you know, like for like Sunday school teaching, it's like, oh, I'm gonna make all these kids like Saint Paul, like Saint Mark. But really, like we should be learning from these kids as well. You know, I think that like, what do you think, Dave? Like, how much should we attribute to God?
Everything.
Of course.
Everything. Like says in James that every good gift comes from heaven, from the Father of lights. Like everything good about us, all our strengths and our weaknesses, that's like we should always attribute that to God. Like we can't exist without His grace. Like we can't have any kind of spiritual like success or anything without His grace. Like we always have to attribute. And the story about King Nebuchadnezzar is really nice. Like there's a saying from Saint Seraphim of Sarov: the Lord sometimes allows people who are devoted to Him to fall into such dreadful vices, and this is in order to prevent them from falling into a still greater sin, pride. Your temptation will pass and you'll spend the remaining days of your life in humility, only do not forget your sin. So like pride is such a dangerous, terrible thing that God would sometimes rather like give us certain tribulations or whatever to humble us, to like prevent us from going into pride. Like He protects us from pride.
Yeah, it says even in Proverbs that the Lord will destroy the house of the proud. You know, like it's huge. Like God will like completely cut you off and humiliate you.
Scary,
Yeah, it's scary. So I think we've constructed an idea about, you know, pride and about how to overcome it in the first half of the segment. But we have a lot more to cover after the break, so we'll see you soon. Hello and welcome back. So far we've been discussing pride and the dangers of pride and how the risks we can come across that will make us fall into it. And personally, I find myself, whenever I listen to a sermon about lying, for example, I find myself thinking, Andrew really needs to hear this sermon, like Andrew's in desperate need of hearing this sermon. Instead of maybe thinking about myself first, maybe I need to take the message of the sermon first. It's to take the plank out of your own eye before looking at the speck in your brother's in order to see clearly. And I was just wondering, what situations have you guys as youth been in that lead to that sort of pride? Gabriella?
Well, personally, I went through a bit of an experience with it. Still am struggling. I remember a period, a couple of years ago, it was last year or something, and I was still doing everything like I had normally done, praying every day or going to confession when I did, but there was something different. I was feeling very distant from God, and I always thought, maybe it's just a period of, dryness. So I didn't really think much of it. And I went to confession, and like every time I came out, I didn't feel any different. Usually I feel like really relieved and really blessed, but I never felt any different afterwards. And I'm talking to a Bruno about it, but he thought I was being a bit paranoid, like I always am. So he was just like, just maybe give it some prayer, and maybe you'll see. And that night, something came up on my top sites, and I'd never been on that website. Like it was just, and I had prayed before that. I said, please God, look, just search my heart, tell me what I'm doing wrong. If there's anything that I'm doing wrong, please just reveal yourself to me, because, I was really, really struggling with that. Like, I was clueless. And I saw on the top sites, it was like sus cops from the United States. It was a website. I was like, I've never seen this before, so I clicked on it. I'm like, someone's been on my computer. It's
God.
And it was like a tick box thing of pride versus humility, and it was saying it was a self-assessment guide, and it says you should tick off which ones you think you are. And I was able to tick off every single one of the pride boxes. And I was like, oh wow, okay. So I thought maybe this, and I hadn't been confessing pride as one of my sins. I hadn't even realized, I didn't really know what pride actually was. I always thought it was when people boasted about themselves, or when I didn't really know the actual detriments of it. And so, I thought, okay, I was really tired though, so I didn't really give it much thought about it. I was a bit startled by that. And then, the next time I saw Abuna, he gave me a book, Spiritual Concepts on Pride. And so it was just like, this is all in the time span of 1 week that this all happened. And that Sunday, the sermon from the gospel was on pride. And so I was like, okay, maybe God's trying to send me a message here. And I really looked into it, and, I realized from that, like, how much I had fallen into this sin. I had let it consume me and consume my prayers, and I was reflecting, and I was reflecting on my prayers and my Bible reading, and none of it was ever genuine. None of it was ever, wasn't thanking God. I wasn't ever, stripping myself down before God, and and I realized that was why there was a bit of a barrier between me and God. And I went and told the Borna, and he he recognized it, and he gave me some tips as to how to overcome it. And still to this day I struggle. It's something that is one of my biggest battles.
And it's like you said, like it's very subtle.
The
characteristics are
very
so
sneaky.
Small. It's like it's definitely characteristics of the devil himself. Like, he's very, very cunning. Exactly. Like Michelle, you once told me a story about how subtle it can really be.
Yeah, because I must admit, pride as a sin is very common. We don't realize how common it is. There was this one guy who was struggling with this sin for many, many months. And finally, he felt that he had overcome the sin. And once he felt that pride, and he was like, yes, I overcame the sin, within half an hour, he fell back into the sin again. And then he went to Warner and confessed that he did fall back into the sin. And it is because once he overcame the sin, he didn't thank God for taking the sin away from his heart, from taking away the desires. He was like, yes, I was able to overcome it. So that pride in itself, and then the fact that it was able to sneak up on him within a matter of half an hour and make him fall again.
And he loses like all joy and peace. It's not something bad, of course, to overcome a sin. It gives me great joy and great peace. Like that I've overcome it. But if I don't attribute that, success, of course, to God, then I'll be struggling and I'll fall into pride immediately. Especially
when it comes to overcoming sins, because things like taking a test and all that, we see that physically. We're the ones holding the pen, we're the ones answering the questions. But overcoming sin, we are human. We are born in death. We are...
With our own efforts, it's impossible. It's only by the great grace of God that you can overcome that.
So to say that we have overcome sin by ourselves is, I think, one of the ultimate signs of pride.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so David, you were once telling me a story about a monk who fell into pride. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, there was a famous story from the Desert Fathers, and saying that like there was this monk and he was really kind of excelling in his prayers and everything like that, and so the devil kind of jumped in, tried to play with his head a bit, and he went and said, "Oh, you know, you're such a great monk, and your prayers are like pleasing God and all this stuff."
I heard he went in the form of an angel.
Yeah. Sorry, in the form of an angel, and he's like,
key details.
my bad. And he was like, "Yeah, God is so pleased with you that you know what? He's going to take you to heaven. And he's going to take you to heaven in 3 days. So in 3 days, meet me at the edge of your cave, and because of all your prayers and everything, we're going to take you to heaven." And the monk was like, "Oh man, you know, like I made it. Like I'm so great."
We made it. Yes.
And he went to his confession father and told him, and his confession father was like, "You know, look, I think this is the trick from the devil. I think he, you know." And he didn't listen to him. He said, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just jealous because I'm going to go to heaven." And he went in 3 days, and the chariot was there. It was a big, glorious chariot, just like with Elijah. And the monk, as soon as he stepped onto the chariot, it burst into flames. Obviously, it didn't hide, and he just fell, and he fell to his death. And
wow.
I mean, it's a pretty harsh story, but it's got a very, very true, relevant message for us.
And like we've spoken about, you know, how God resists the proud, and he hates, you know, like he hates people that are proud. Like, does that mean, like, especially in that story, like, do you think maybe he hardened his heart instead of trying to help him overcome his pride?
I don't think so.
It's a hard question.
God always gives us a way out.
I think you have to seek that first, though. You know, it's like it's a synergy. Your relationship with God is a synergy. He's not going to just take the first step. You have to make that initial step, and then he will help you then. But it's not like I fall into pride. God's going to be like, okay, you know, like do you know what I mean? Like it was only
like he gave like I don't want to play devil's advocate, but like he gave Adam and Eve a chance, you know, when they fell into pride. But like with Pharaoh, it says it so clearly, like he hardened his heart, you know.
But that's like you're getting into a bit of like the language of the Bible when it says that he hardened his heart. It's not saying that God did that. God made him to resist God. It's saying that God honors our free will. Like if we choose to ignore God, we're actually hardening our own hearts. And there's one of the Psalms, and I think it comes up in Hebrews, and it says, "Do not harden your hearts as in the day of rebellion when you're in the desert," all that kind of stuff. So we do that to ourselves. Like we condition our own hearts. Just like if we pray and if we have a very active spiritual life, our hearts are softened. It's a place where God can reside. If we're constantly resisting him, and Pharaoh, like he saw all these amazing signs and he didn't want to acknowledge God. So he did that to himself. He conditioned his own heart away from God.
Just on the story of Pharaoh as well and Moses. Moses was actually a very interesting person because when he started off, he didn't know what to do. He was sitting there and he was like, God went up to him and he said, "Look, I need you to go up to Pharaoh and tell him to let my people free." And when Moses replied, what's interesting is he said, "But Lord, I do not have a mouth that can speak like this," right? And you think about the statement there. First of all, Moses is thinking about himself instead of thinking about the people. The people, the Hebrews have been suffering for a long time under the hand of Pharaoh, and they're being tortured and they're being driven in to do these tasks that they didn't want to do. And instead of thinking about them, he replied, "I." But then the Lord replied to him and said, "But I will give you the mouth. I'm the person that made mouths. Why can't I give you a mouth?" And then, you know, he still thinks about himself. But what is the most amazing thing is God says to him, "Tell Pharaoh, I am." And so it's something we need to do constantly with our life. We need to stop thinking about ourselves and think that God, I am. He is the one. And so if we put him as the singular, if we put him as the first person, then we won't think about ourselves all the time.
And it's a huge thing, you know, like the change like that you see when Moses was thinking about himself, you know, like in his pride, you know, so to speak, like he was thinking, I can't do this, blah, blah, blah. Like he was stuttering, he was confused, he was lost, he didn't know what to do. But as soon as he attributed everything to God, you saw all the blessings that, you know, happened, that followed afterwards. What do you think, Michelle?
I think it's like to relate all of that into our like practical lives. I think the main issue, like with any kind of solution, with any kind of to solve a problem, the first step that anyone will tell you is to acknowledge that there is a problem, to acknowledge that there is a fault, and from there you can fix it. So out of all those stories you see, you know, with Pharaoh, he didn't acknowledge that there was a fault. He went in his way, and that's how his heart was hardened. Whereas, say with, like, you know, you need to acknowledge that you do have pride, and that is the first step to overcome it.
And that leads me to my next question, like, how do we heal ourselves of pride? You know, like, it's those small things that like Michelle was saying, like that acknowledging that, like you have to have that self-reflection where you examine yourself and say, okay, you know, like there is something wrong. I have to understand, like, but how then? What then do you do to overcome it completely?
I think that's something that you have to, you know, you have to sit in your room, you have to go to God, and you have to speak with an honest and an open heart. You say, God, Lord, search my heart. I've fallen into this sin, and I've come to you. I'm making this step. I want to renounce this sin. I want to repent. I want to do it. Even if you're struggling, if you don't want to, just say, I want to. That's enough. And, you know, if you just beg, and if you are genuinely sad, like, first of all, you have to want to make that change, or you want to make that change. And that is the process of repenting. And you beg to God to search his heart. And you practice little things like acknowledging everything to God.
And that was the problem with Pharaoh, you know, he didn't even want to change. Like, that's why God like hardened it, so he let him to like do his will, you know.
Of course.
And you look at as well, we need to stop comparing. Like, so a lot of the time we think about, oh, that guy is so good, right? I wish I had this, right? And you always say, like, I wish I had this characteristic that I was pure. Or, I wish I never lied to people. You know, this guy is so good. We need to stop comparing ourselves all the time.
That's a fair point, but at the same time, you know, it's good to learn.
Yeah.
It's good to learn, but sometimes we think about making this perfect human, and you know, and you bring all these parts from different people, and you're like, I wish I had all of this.
That actually reminds me, you know, like of the Saint Anthony story. You know, how he went around and he was saying, like, oh, you know, this person's humble, so he stays with this like someone that's humble, really, like for a few days until he becomes more humble, and then he goes to someone that's pure, and he does the same thing as well. Like, and he kept, you know, trying to bring all these attributes until he got to the point where he said, I must be the most holy person in the whole desert. You know, I'm the first person to like completely give up the whole world and then come out to the desert just to spend time with God. You know, and then at that point, an angel came down to him and said, no, you're not the most holy person in the world. Like, you're not even the most holy person, most holy, humble person in this desert. And you look at, he went and took him to Amapola, who was St. Paul.
He's like, if it wasn't for
and he was
St.
there
Paul's prayers.
for many years, exactly, yeah.
But I think what's important about the comparison thing is it distracts us from inner reflection. And when I'm constantly looking outside and looking at other people, I forget about myself.
I beg to differ a little bit there. You know,
I like this, the tension in the...
I think sometimes when you, like I read in a book once, it's good to sometimes compare yourself to the saints, because when you do fall into pride, you see, look at these saints, look how they gave up their lives for Christ, look at how much they prayed, look at the services they did, and look at how I am nothing compared to that.
I can see where Andrew's coming from.
Yeah,
like,
I can see
if you start comparing yourselves with just, you know, another everyday human kind of thing, like, you can also, it might not just be the righteous, it could be the wicked. You could start saying, well, you know, I'm not this person, like this righteous person, but look at this wicked person. Thank God I'm not this guy.
Self-reflection always comes first. And if you don't look in the inside first, there's no way you can start to analyze the outside.
But it's like it's good to have those shining examples.
I'm not saying
you can look at yourself and say, "Oh, I'm better than I was yesterday, therefore I'm really good." But then you see someone.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect example. Looking at the old man instead of
it's really important.
Looking at other men.
Yeah,
so
like looking at the saints.
The question was like, what are the steps to overcome pride? But I think from most of your answers, I think you can see that the struggle is so great that it is not just overcoming. Oh, you know, your goal is to overcome pride. It's a daily battle. It's a daily, like you have to constantly, and that's where self-reflection comes in.
And
like,
it's at all spiritual levels as well. Like if it's going to affect, you know, the father of monasticism, then it's going to affect us. Like,
and it's not just the external, you know, like I'm getting praise from this person, so I make myself bigger than everyone. But like you said, and like everyone was saying, it starts from inside. It's a very internal battle that you're fighting. You know, like you could be telling yourself, oh, I'm such a good person, you know, like I pray every night to God, but then God won't be listening, you know. He says it so clearly, God resists the proud. So what other like small things, just to finish up, like what other small things can we do to like heal ourselves and cure ourselves from this, you know, deadly sin?
I like what Michelle said, like, you know, you can't get better unless you realize that you're sick and then you go to the doctor. You know, we have to do the same thing. And I think like I'm not sure if we're going to have another episode on humility. We can really like flesh into how to have a humble heart instead of full of pride. But like, yeah, just to focus on like, if you look at Christ and the way that he dealt with, you know, when the devil came to tempt him, and there was a lot of pride in that. And it was like even the idea that, you know, to turn these stones into bread. And like the way that God responded is that he relies on God the Father for everything. Like that God will provide everything, provision. And it's the same for like lust, you know, like you think in pride, I have the right to have this kind of pleasure, whatever. We have to look for God with everything.
I think also like another point, it's something like Michelle touched on it before. It's a daily decision. It's not something you fall into pride and you just keep falling, because once you fall, like you will keep falling, but it's a daily decision you have to make that you want to renounce that sin. And it's something that you really have to strip back before God. You have to be completely honest.
Yeah.
And I think like sometimes spiritual reading actually really helps with that. You know, like I know that there's a really great book called like The Crucified Jesus by Father Menassie. And yeah, I think that's a really great book for things like
Of course.
that.
Well, I think we've covered heaps for today. Hopefully we've answered some of your questions on pride and how to overcome it. But we'll see you guys soon, and thanks for watching.